It all started in an ordinary kitchen, when my housekeeper Tamara, who had been silent for 20 years, suddenly locked the door. "Alexei Sergeyevich," she said quietly, but with such an intonation that I immediately became wary and put down the cup of half-drunk tea. "Forgive me, for God's sake. I have been carrying one truth within myself for more than 20 years and I can no longer remain silent, because this sin has become too heavy. If I don't tell you the truth now, you may simply not live long enough." Winters. She worked in my house for more than 20 years, remaining invisible to me, like familiar furniture or a clock ticking on the wall. Quiet, inconspicuous, always somewhere off to the side with a rag or tray. This is exactly how I perceived her all these years. I laughed. Not because what I heard seemed funny to me, but because my tired brain refused to perceive this strange, frightening phrase seriously. I wanted to answer something, maybe make an awkward joke to defuse the tension, but she didn't let me get a word in. I didn't know that this laugh of mine would be the last in my old life and that I would have to destroy with my own hands the reputation of the main person in our city because of the secret that she revealed. Now, looking back, I understand that I did the right thing, but you can be the judge. Before I tell you how my world collapsed, please write in the comments what city or country you are listening to me from now. It will be easier for me to continue knowing that somewhere on the other end there are living people. Hello. My name is Alexei Sergeyevich. I am 64 years old, and I am an ordinary person who is used to believing in actions, not beautiful words. I was born and raised in a small town where people live according to simple and understandable laws: hard work, home, children, church on major holidays and conversations about so that everything would be like with people. As a child, I rarely saw my father, because he was a truck driver and constantly disappeared on long flights, bringing home only the smell of diesel fuel and a tired smile. Mom raised the 5 of us almost alone, torn between the garden and shifts at the factory, but never allowed herself to complain about fate. I heard the same thing from her, like a mantra: "Father is on the road, he earns. He is our breadwinner." And I grew up with a feeling, as solid as concrete, that a man does not have to be affectionate, talkative or sentimental. He is obliged to carry the burden of responsibility. He is obliged to hold the house on his shoulders, even if it means living on endless travels and sleeping in fits and starts. When my father died, I inherited not a savings book, but his old truck, in need of repair, and debts that seemed unbearable for a young guy. It was not the start that many people dream of, but a real trap. Either I stretch out and harness myself to this strap, or we all drown together in poverty. I started by taking absolutely any kind of transportation, not disdaining anything. I transported bricks, old furniture, scrap metal, perishable foods. I spent the night in a frozen cabin, washed myself with ice-cold water on the highway, ate at cheap roadside restaurants. Canteens. There were weeks when I returned home only to throw off dirty clothes, hug my mother and leave again into the night. I got used to considering chronic fatigue as the norm, and my loneliness as an inevitable price for the fact that my loved ones live warm and well-fed. Gradually, at the cost of frayed nerves and sleepless nights, I paid off all my father's debts. Then, risking everything, I bought a second used one, a car, then a third. Hired drivers appeared, a small repair base on the outskirts, my own dispatcher and, finally, the first serious regular customers. Over time, my small handicraft cargo transportation business turned into a normal strong transport company, several dozen trucks, its own warehouse, a bright office and long-term contracts. There was enough money not only for life, but also for a decent level. We built a large brick house, bought a good car, made repairs, and began to carry normal clothes. But the price of my success remained the same as in my youth: I was almost never at home. I arrived tired, lay down for a couple of days, mechanically solved the accumulated family issues and again disappeared for a week, dissolving on the road. I met Larissa when I was already a little on my feet and could afford to invite a girl to a restaurant. She was from a very proper, intelligent family, where at dinner they liked to talk about decency, about an impeccable reputation and about faith in God. Larissa, unlike me, often went to church, knew all the prayers, participated in church events, helped set tables at holidays, brought food for the needy, collected donations. Then, looking at her bright face and modest scarf, it seemed to me that such a person was simply physically incapable of dirt or deception. Family celebrations, people came to him for advice in difficult times. He had an unbreakable reputation as a strict, principled person, a true shepherd. I perceived his presence in our lives as a kind of seal of quality. If such a priest is next to us, it means that our home is under reliable spiritual protection. We had 2 children, Dennis and Sveta, and I was partly in 7th heaven. I was absolutely sure that I was living the right, worthy life as a man. I work a lot, fully provide for my family is always well off, my wife is at church, my children are growing up in prosperity and do not need anything. I didn't see how the atmosphere in my own home subtly changed over the years, because most of the time I was simply not physically there. I didn't hear strange pauses in conversations when I suddenly entered the room. I didn't notice how Larissa became too calm, too confident, not in our marriage, but in the fact that I will always be inroad. I became a convenient resource for them, something like reliable furniture, which is noticed and brought into the middle of the room only when it is needed for business. When the children were still small, we hired a house help, Tamara Ivanovna. She was a modest widow, a quiet woman who knew how to work without unnecessary questions and complaints. She cleaned the huge house, prepared dinners, washed, ironed, looked after, took care of the household while Larissa was busy with her social and church affairs. Tamara lived in our house for more than 20 years, becoming almost a shadow of our walls. I treated her exclusively in a business-like manner. The work was done, the payment was received. Sometimes, of course, I could say thank you for the delicious borscht, I could bring heavy bags of groceries or help with money for medicine. But in essence, she was for me only a part of an established life, a useful function, like a new gas boiler or trouble-free washing machine. Everything began to fall apart precisely at the moment when I unexpectedly did not leave for the next flight. A major contract was suddenly postponed for a week, the car required minor repairs, and I was left at home on the most ordinary weekday morning. For my family this was unusual, almost inconvenient, as if I had violated the unwritten law of their existence. I noticed how Larissa began to get irritated over the smallest things, as if my presence was interfering with some secret schedule that she used to considering it my personal space. On the same day, when Larissa left on business for a charitable foundation, Tamara Ivanovna came up to me while I was sitting in the kitchen and asked me to spend a minute with her. I must admit, I thought that they would talk about an increase in salary or about some everyday problems like a leaky tap, but she stood pale, with trembling hands, and for the first time in all these long years she looked me straight in the eyes. Do you feel that feeling when the air around you thickens so much that it becomes difficult to breathe? What happened, Tamara Ivanovna? I asked, feeling an incomprehensible, sticky anxiety arising inside me. Is someone sick? She took a deep breath, as if she was about to jump into icy water, and said the words that I will remember until my death. When you are not there, Alexei Sergeyevich, there is another man in this house. And this is not a neighbor, not a distant relative, not some random acquaintance. I froze, feeling the blood draining from my face, and my heart starting to beat somewhere in my throat. My brain feverishly went through the options, trying to find a safe explanation, but Tamara's gaze left no chance for illusion. Who? That was all I could exhale, although some part of me no longer wanted to know the answer. This is Father Nikolai, she squeezed out, albeit quietly, as if ashamed to pronounce this name out loud in such a context. The abbot. The same man who married us, baptized our children, sat at your table at every holiday, patted you on the shoulder and said with a smile that we have a strong, exemplary family. The one in whom you trusted more than yourself. Everything inside me broke. And for a second there was a deafening silence, in which I heard only the frantic pounding of my own blood in my temples. The first reaction was purely male, stupid and dangerous. Now I'll wait until she returns and I'll destroy everything here to hell. But Tamara Ivanovna, as if reading my thoughts, suddenly grabbed my hand, a gesture unthinkable for her until that moment. "Don't try it. Shout, Alexei Sergeyevich," she whispered quickly, hotly. "No one will believe you without proof. He will say, a jealous old man has lost his mind in his old age. And they will cover him up, you know. He has people, he has great connections in the city, he has an impeccable reputation as a holy man. And Larissa will twist you so that only you will be to blame for everything." It sounded terribly true. I am too. For many years I have seen how issues are resolved in our city when a person has a high status and the necessary contacts. The rage that a second ago obscured my eyes with a red veil was replaced by cold, rational horror. I realized that I was standing on the edge of an abyss, and one wrong step would cost me everything that I had been building for 40 years. Tamara saw that I had come to my senses a little, and proposed a plan, simple, tough, but the only true one. "You must play the scenario familiar to everyone," she said, and firmness appeared in her voice. "Tell Larissa that you are urgently leaving on a flight for a few days. Pack your travel bag, get into the car. Leave so that the neighbors can see. And hide with my relatives on the other side of the city and just wait for the call." She promised, "As soon as Father Nikolai appears on the doorstep, she will let me know." I agreed because I understood, too need to see this with my own eyes. Otherwise, I will either go crazy from corrosive suspicions, or they will really make me out to be a psycho or a buffoon. When I told Larissa in the evening that I was leaving, I greedily peered into her face, trying to find at least a shadow of grief. She tried to look concerned, sighed, shook her head, but her eyes gave her away. There was no sadness of separation in them. There was a barely noticeable flare-up relieved joy, as if the house would finally be normal again. That is, without me. That night, the last night in my past life, I lay next to her and could not sleep. I listened to her even breathing and thought, how many hundreds of times I returned from the road, lay down in this same place, considered myself a husband, master, head of the family, and did not even suspect that I was not the first and not the main one here. It was the most humiliating feeling in life, not just burning jealousy, but icy the realization that you have been kept behind a comfortable screen for years. The next day, like a thief in my own home, I packed my bag and left, officially on a flight. In fact, to the cramped apartment of Tamara Ivanovna's relatives, where I had to spend the night on a sagging sofa and wait for the call that was supposed to kill my past life. Those 2 days that I spent in the apartment seemed longer to me than all my flights to the north combined. Time, while waiting for my own execution, stretches treacherously slowly, turning every minute into a sticky, suffocating eternity. Sunday service, how Father Nikolai sat down at the table without an invitation. Previously, I saw piety and friendship in this, but now every memory burned like a hot iron, turning my soul inside out. The phone lay in front of me on the coffee table like a black silent bar, and I hypnotized it with my gaze, at the same time wanting and fearing that it would come to life. The call came in the evening of the second day, when the blue twilight had already thickened outside the window. Tamara spoke briefly, almost in a whisper, but I heard trembling tension in her voice. "He arrived. The car is parked in the backyard, so that it is not visible from the street." I didn't ask any unnecessary questions, I just silently pressed the end button, took the keys and went out into the cool evening. My hands did not tremble. On the contrary, some strange icy calm came over me, as if I was not driving home, where my life was falling apart, but on a complex loading of an oversized cargo. I drove the car carefully, following all the rules, and I caught myself thinking that I was delaying the moment of truth. Until I saw them together, I still had a ghostly, stupid hope of a mistake. I left the car in a nearby alley, in the shade of overgrown linden trees, so that the headlights would not streak across the windows. I crept towards my own house like a thief, trying not to step on dry branches and hiding behind the dense lilac bushes that I myself had planted 10 years ago. The gate to the courtyard was slightly open. Tamara, as promised, left me a loophole. A soft, cozy light was burning in the house. the same family light to which I so loved returning from business trips. Through the large living room window overlooking the garden, everything was visible in full view. The curtains were drawn carelessly, leaving a gap diagonally. I took out my phone, turned on the camera and took a step closer, feeling my heart beating somewhere in the palm of my hand. Throat, making it difficult to breathe. What I saw did not look like a pastoral conversation or spiritual instruction. I saw Father Nikolai sitting in my chair, in the same leather one that I bought especially for relaxing after flights. He was without a cassock, in an ordinary shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and holding a glass of my wine in his hand. Larissa stood next to him, putting her hand on his shoulder, and laughed, lightly, relaxed, the way she hadn't laughed with me for a long time. But then he pulled her towards him, and she sat on his lap as usual, in a possessive manner. I pressed the record button, feeling like something big and important was dying inside me. It wasn't just betrayal, when people lose their heads in the absence of a partner. It was a long-term, established everyday intimacy. I saw how he stroked her back, how she straightened his hair, gestures of people who know each other to the last mole. I stood in the darkness of my garden, clutching the phone until my fingers turned white, and realized that I was not looking at lovers, but at real spouses who were simply using my house as a backdrop for their happiness. I filmed this for several minutes, long, painful minutes, so that no one, not even the most expensive lawyer, would have any doubts about the nature of their relationship. When the priest kissed my wife, really, wetly and deeply, I lowered the phone and pressed stop. I didn't break windows or start a fight, although my fists clenched so hard that my muscles cramped. I understood, if I went in now, there would be screaming, fuss, he would run away, and then she would say that it seemed to me that I was drunk, that I had made it all up. I needed something else, a cold, irrefutable fixation of the fact. I waited until the light in the living room went out and they moved to another part of the house, and then returned to the car and sat there for another hour, looking into the darkness and listening to the engine cool down. When I finally entered the house, Father Nikolai was no longer there. Apparently, he left through the same back door while I was sitting in the car. Larissa was in the kitchen. She was cleaning, putting 2 glasses in the sink, humming something to herself. Nose. Seeing me, she shuddered and dropped the towel. But she quickly pulled herself together and pulled the usual mask of a caring wife over her face. Alexei? Her voice sounded almost natural, only a little higher than usual. You left on a flight. Did something happen to the car? I silently walked to the table, sat down and put the phone in front of her, screen up. It happened, Larissa, I said in a voice that I didn't recognize, hoarse, alien, as if from a barrel. What happened was that I arrived home too late. About 20 years late. She tried to smile, but the corners of her lips twitched treacherously. What are you talking about, Alyosha? You're probably tired. I didn't let her finish the performance and pressed play. Frames flashed on the small screen, her hand on his shoulder, his laughter, their kiss. I looked at her face and saw how it changed, first bewilderment, then animal fear, then an angry, desperate realization that there was nowhere to run. When the video ended, there was such silence in the kitchen that you could hear the refrigerator humming. This is a montage, she finally squeezed out, but even she didn't believe her words. You set it all up so that. I hit the table with my palm so that the sugar bowl jumped. Stop lying, Larissa, I saw everything with my own eyes. I stood 2 meters from the window. Don't humiliate yourself even more. She sank onto a chair, as if her legs had given way, and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook, but I didn't feel pity, only disgust and emptiness. How long ago? I asked. Just don't lie. There's no point now. She took her hands off her face and looked at me with dry, reddened eyes. There was no longer meekness or piety in this look, only the tired, angry revelation of a woman driven into a corner. Always, she said quietly, and this word hit me harder than a slap in the face, even before the wedding. I felt the floor disappearing from under my feet. What does before the wedding mean? I asked again, hoping that I had misheard. We loved each other since school, she spoke quickly, haltingly, as if trying to justify herself. But he was being prepared for ordination. He needed an impeccable biography. And my parents needed a groom with money and prospects. You were the ideal option, hardworking, simple, always on the road. You didn't ask unnecessary questions, you just brought money and disappeared. This satisfied everyone. I asked again, feeling nausea rising in my throat. This didn't suit me. I lived with you. I loved you. I thought we were a family. And I was just a sponsor of your novel? Don't say that, she suddenly raised her voice, going on the offensive. I was a good wife to you. You had a clean house, a hot dinner, ironed shirts. You lived like Christ in the bosom. What did you miss? But yes, I had my own life. But I never disgraced you in public. At that moment I realized one terrible thing. She sincerely did not consider herself to be guilty. In her distorted picture of the world, she was a victim of circumstances who was simply spinning as best she could. That's not what I was worried about anymore. A thought flashed in my head, from which I was thrown into a cold sweat. Children, I said, looking straight into her eyes, Dennis and Sveta. They. Larissa turned so pale that she looked like paper. They are yours, she shouted too hastily, too loudly. Of course, yours, how can you think such a thing? But I already saw this fear. I heard this falseness that I had not noticed before. I remembered how Dennis looked like her, and Sveta. Sveta had the same eye shape as him. Father Nikolai. How could I be so blind? How could I look at my children for years and not see the obvious? Tomorrow we're going to the clinic, I said harshly, getting up from the chair. We'll do a DNA test on both of them. Are you crazy? She jumped up, trying to block my path. You will disgrace the children, they are adults. How do you explain this to them? You will destroy their psyche. You destroyed your psyche when you turned our life into a cheap show, I snapped. Either we do a test and find out the truth, whatever it may be. Or I file for divorce with the wording treason, attach this video to the file and send a copy to the diocese. And then the shame will be such that you will not leave the house. Choose. She froze, gasping for air like a fish thrown ashore. I saw how the gears were spinning in her head, how she was calculating the options. She realized that I was not joking. She realized that the former flexible Alexei, who could be turned as you like, was no longer there. Okay, she whispered with hatred, do your test. But when you see that they are yours, you will crawl on your knees in front of me, begging forgiveness. If they are mine, I answered, already standing in the doorway, I will give you all the property and leave naked. But if not? I didn't finish. I left the kitchen, feeling my knees shaking, and went up to the second floor to the guest room. I could no longer enter our bedroom, I would just vomit. The next week turned into agony of waiting. I told the children that we needed to get tested to check for a hereditary disease, lied so as not to injure them ahead of time. Larissa, I am sure, had already managed to turn them against me. We went to a private laboratory in the regional center, handed over the biomaterial and parted in deathly silence. Larissa walked around the house with an air of offended virtue, demonstratively slammed doors and talked on the phone in a whisper, locking herself in the bathroom. I felt as if I was walking through thin ice in the middle of a huge river. One wrong step, and the black water will close over your head. The week of waiting for the results of the genetic examination dragged on not like ordinary time, but like a sticky and endless molasses mess in which we all got stuck up to our necks. I tried to be at home as little as possible, disappearing at the base from morning to night, inventing non-existent breakdowns and urgent shipments, just to keep my eyes open. Larissa. She chose the tactics of offended innocence. She walked around the rooms with her head held high, sang demonstratively in the shower and sighed at every opportunity so that I could hear what an ungrateful brute I was. The children, Dennis and Sveta, felt this tension in their skin, like animals feel the approach of a thunderstorm, and looked at me with a silent question, not understanding what black cat ran between their parents, but in advance taking the side of their mother. A letter from the laboratory arrived by email on Thursday, when I was sitting in my office at the base and indifferently sorting out travel documents. The notification on the phone screen flashed a short, quick signal, and at that moment my heart was beating so hard that my eyes darkened. I hesitated, looking at the glowing envelope, and felt a cold trickle of sweat crawling down my back, although the air conditioner was working at full power. Fingers, accustomed turning the steering wheel and fingering the iron, suddenly became disobedient and weak, refusing to make a simple movement on the screen. I understood that behind this click was hidden the verdict of my whole life. But it was no longer possible to delay this moment. The unknown was eating away at me stronger than any, even the most terrible truth. I took a deep breath, as if before diving into the depths, and opened the file. The first was Dennis' result. I made my way through complex medical terms, tables of alleles and incomprehensible numbers, looking with my eyes for only one, the most important line, conclusion. And when I found it, the letters swam before my eyes, merging into a black spot. The likelihood of paternity is excluded. I reread this word syllable by syllable, excluded. The brain refused to believe. Grasping a straw of hope, I almost without breathing scrolled down the document, to Sveta's results. Maybe error? Maybe at least my daughter is my beloved, my princess, whom I carried on my shoulders and taught to ride a bicycle? The possibility of paternity is excluded. It became so quiet in the office that I heard a fly buzzing, beating against the glass. The earth did not open up, the ceiling did not collapse, but a huge, scorched funnel formed inside me, in which everything flew away with a whistle: children's matinees, sleepless nights at the cribs, pride in the first steps, plans for grandchildren. It turned out that none of this happened, or rather, it was, but not with me. I was just a spectator in a strange cinema, who mistakenly paid for a ticket at the cost of his only life. I sat and looked blankly at the monitor, feeling how not anger was growing inside, but a terrible icy emptiness. It turns out that I worked hard all my life, ruined my health on the highways, slept in booths, froze and starved for the sake of the children of another man. For the sake of the children of the same man who himself taught me morals, and then came to my house and slept with my wife while I earned money for their comfortable life. I was not a father or a husband for them, but simply a convenient, trouble-free wallet, a security function that was tolerated for the sake of comfort. I don't remember how I drove home. The car drove itself on autopilot, while I tried to collect myself piece by piece so as not to fall apart right behind the wheel. When I entered the hallway, Larissa came out towards me. Apparently she was waiting, not finding a place for herself. Seeing my face, gray, exhausted, with dull eyes, she understood everything without words. Her mask of arrogance flew off instantly, replaced by an expression of animal horror. She backed away, covering her mouth with her palm, and rested her back against the wall, as if expecting blows. Both? She whispered barely audibly, and in this question there was the last drop of hope for a miracle. Both, I answered in a voice in which there was nothing human left, only the grinding of metal. Congratulations to you, Larissa. You pulled off the scam of the century. She didn't scream or make excuses, she just sagged, sliding down the wall to the floor, covered her face with her hands. For the first time I saw her cry not for show, but from real deep fear or future. Her tears no longer affected me. I walked past her into the living room, where the children were sitting. Dennis was reading something on the phone, Sveta was leafing through a magazine. They raised their heads, and for the first time I looked at them with different eyes. I looked for my features in their faces, my nose, my chin, my eyes, and with horror I realized that they were not there. I saw what the brain had previously blocked: Dennis's high forehead, the soft oval of Sveta's face, their manner of smiling. These were the features of Father Nikolai. They were his copies, his flesh and blood. And I simply attributed them to myself, because it was necessary. Dad, why are you so strange? Sveta asked, putting the magazine aside. Are the tests bad? The word dad cut into my ears like a knife on glass. I'm not your dad. Your dad is counting donations in church now, I wanted to shout. But I restrained myself. I had no right to dump this dirt on them like that, from the doorway, without preparation. They were adults, but in this game they were also victims of deception, although they lived at my expense. Normal tests, I said casually and quickly got up to myself. That night I made a decision. I could have acted nobly, get a divorce quietly, divide the property, leave the house to them so as not to traumatize the children, and go to live out my life in a one-room apartment, saving face. This is exactly what Larissa was counting on. She knew my character, she knew that I did not like scandals and washing dirty linen in public. She hoped that I would swallow this pill, dry myself and disappear, allowing them and continue to play in the Light family. But something dark, heavy and inexorable rose up in me, not a thirst for revenge, but a thirst for the highest justice. They made me an idiot publicly, albeit behind my back. Father Nikolai spent years building his career as a priest, relying on my wife and my money. He lied to thousands of people, looking them in the eye, and continued to lie now. Leaving everything as it was meant, becoming an accomplice to this monstrous lie, allowing evil to triumph under the guise of virtue. I realized, they would not leave clean, hiding the dirt behind a cassock and a correct life. The next day I went not to work, but to the temple. There was no service, the church was empty, only a few grandmothers were wiping candlesticks. I saw Father Nikolai, he stood in the center, talking with some patron of the arts, confident in himself, at ease, beaming with his own importance. He noticed me and nodded welcomingly, even took a step towards to bless. I almost turned inside out from this false face. I turned around and left. But a plan had already matured in my head, clear, cold and merciless, like a hammer blow. I knew that next Sunday there would be a big holiday in the church, the founding day of the parish. The whole cream of the city would gather, the administration, businessmen, regular parishioners. After the liturgy, they usually held a reporting meeting, at which Father Nikolai showed on a large projector hanging right in the church, videos about the life of the community, about trips, about repairs, and thanked sponsors. I myself was on these lists more than once, I myself helped buy this equipment. It was the ideal place and the ideal time. Having returned home, I behaved frighteningly calmly. I did not talk to Larissa, I slept inquest, but no longer threatened and did not demand explanations. This calm frightened her more than the screams. "Alexei, we need to talk," she decided on Saturday evening. "How will we live further?" the children ask. "Tomorrow," I cut her off, not looking up from the TV, which I wasn't even watching. "Tomorrow everything will be decided. We will go to the temple for the holiday with the whole family." "To the temple?" She turned pale. "Why, after everything you've learned?" "That's why," I looked at her with a hard look. "We have to save face, Larissa. You yourself always wanted this, reputation, decency. Let us go, thank the priest for everything he did for us." She looked at me with disbelief, trying to find a catch. But the habit of hypocrisy played into her hands, she was so used to living in a lie that she believed it. I decided to reconcile and savvy an external picture for the sake of status. A relieved hope flashed in her eyes. She decided that it was over, that I had broken down and accepted the rules of the game. Sunday morning turned out to be sunny and clear. We dressed festively. I was in a suit that was choking me like a noose, Larissa, in a modest light dress and scarf, children, dressed up and slightly sleepy. We drove in the car silently, as if to a funeral, although outwardly we looked like a perfect picture from an advertising brochure. When we arrived at the temple, the bells were ringing. And this ringing, which had previously seemed blissful to me, now sounded like an alarm bell before a battle. There were a lot of people. People smiled, they shook our hands. Someone shook my hand, someone gave compliments Larissa. Father Nikolai stood on the pulpit, handsome in gold vestments, and preached a sermon about the holiness of the family hearth and that truth always finds a way to the light. Truly, I whispered with my lips, feeling the cold plastic of the flash drive in my pocket. Today she will find. I waited for the end of the service, feeling a spring compressing inside, ready to destroy everything around. I knew that in an hour I would destroy the lives of dozens of people, including my own, but I couldn't stop anymore. The point of no return was past the moment I saw those damned zeros in the test results. The service ended, and that usual fussy part in the church began, which I always didn't like, but endured for Larissa's sake, preparation for the ceremonial report. The altar servers brought a portable screen on a tripod to the center of the hall. Someone was fiddling with the wires, connecting a laptop to the speakers. Parishioners they sat down on benches, waiting for beautiful pictures and speeches of gratitude. Father Nikolai sat in the front row, easily crossing his legs under his cassock, and accepted congratulations from local officials, shining like a polished copper samovar. He looked like a man who holds God by the hand, well-fed, successful, loved by his flock and confident in his complete integrity. Looking at his contented face, I felt the flash drive in my pocket heating up like a hot coal, burning through the fabric of the jacket and the skin underneath. Larissa sat next to me, straight as a string, and nervously fiddled with the edge of the gauze, instinctively feeling the threat emanating from me, although I was sitting completely motionless. The children, Dennis and Sveta, were buried in their phones, bored and waiting for this mandatory program to end so that they could go to the restaurant. They didn't even realize that in a few minutes their familiar world, woven from my money and mother's lies, would shatter into small fragments that could no longer be glued together. When the technical hitch ended and the parish logo appeared on the screen, Father Nikolai came forward, straightened the cross on his chest and began his speech. He spoke beautifully, in a staged baritone, talking about how important it is in our difficult times to remain faithful to traditions, support the temple and be an example of Christian virtue for young people. Each of his words, saturated with false pathos, fell into the crowd, causing an approving roar and nods. But in me these words evoked only a bitter, bilious smile. And now, he said solemnly, looking around the hall with a broad gesture, I want to invite here our main benefactor, the man through whose efforts this iconostasis was updated, my good friend and exemplary family man, Alexei Sergeyevich Lavrov. The audience applauded. People turned their heads, smiling at me. And I slowly rose from my seat, feeling my legs filling with a lead weight. Larissa tried to grab my hand, her eyes widened with sudden panic, but I gently but persistently pushed her hand away and stepped into the aisle. I walked to the pulpit not as a sponsor and friend, but as a soldier on the final assault, knowing that there would be no return from there. I approached the table where the laptop stood, and nodded to the young altar boy who was in charge of the presentation. Misha, I told him quietly but firmly, so that only he could hear, I have my own video material. A surprise for the priest and parishioners. Put this here. The guy who knew me for many years as the main philanthropist, without a second thought, took the proffered flash drive and stuck it in the port. Father Nikolai, standing a couple of meters away, smiled benevolently, apparently expecting another video about what a wise leader he is or footage from our joint picnic. Dear brothers and sisters, my voice sounded hoarse in the microphone, and the echo carried it under the dome, reflecting from the walls painted with faces. Father Nikolai spoke a lot today about the truth, about family and the fact that the secret always becomes obvious. I, as a simple person who does not know how to speak beautifully, decided not to waste time on words, but to show you one story. The story of what is actually hidden behind the facade of an exemplary family and holy friendship, which we are so proud of. A bewildered silence hung in the hall. People felt that something was wrong, but still could not understand what exactly. Father Nikolai frowned, his smile faded slightly, but he still did not move from my place, not believing that I would dare to break the script. I nodded to Misha, and he pressed the spacebar. On the huge screen hanging right in front of the altar, instead of blissful pictures of church life, a shaking image appeared, taken through the window from the garden. At first, a whisper of misunderstanding ran through the hall, a dark garden, a luminous window, some silhouettes. But when the camera came closer and focused, a whisper was replaced by a collective sigh, similar to the sound of air escaping from a punctured tire. Everyone saw them, my wife sitting on the abbot's lap, his hand sliding along her thigh, their long, passionate, completely non-platonic kiss, close up, in high definition, so that every detail, every emotion on their faces was visible. The silence in the temple became so dense that it seemed to be pressing on the eardrums. All you could hear was the hum of the projector and sounds from the video, Larissa's laughter, the clinking of glasses, the muffled voice of the priest. "What is this?" Some woman in the first row squealed, covering her eyes with her hands. Father Nikolai froze, as if struck by thunder. His face in a second became the color of old lime, his mouth opened, but not a sound came out. He looked at the screen, where his double life was put on public display, and could not believe that this was happening before his eyes. Larissa jumped out of her seat, knocking over her chair, and her scream cut through silence. Turn off immediately, this is a lie." But the video continued. And after it, scanned documents appeared on the screen, the results of a DNA test. I asked Misha in advance to make the numbers large. "Do you see this?" I asked into the microphone, and my voice, calm and dead, blocked the noise starting in the hall. "These are the results of the examination. The children whom I raised for 30 years, whom I considered mine, are in fact the children of your abbot. He didn't just sleep with my wife, he lived a double life with her, and used me as a screen and a wallet to feed his illegal family." Real chaos began in the temple. People jumped up with places, someone shouted shame. Someone was crying, someone was trying to break through to the exit, creating a crush. Old women crossed themselves, looking at the screen as if at the appearance of the Antichrist. The men standing behind began to swear loudly, forgetting where they were. Father Nikolai woke up from his stupor and rushed to me. His face was distorted by a grimace of animal rage, not at all similar to the face of a humble shepherd. "Turn it off, this!" he roared, trying to snatch the laptop from the frightened guy. "This is a montage, these are demonic slander. You will answer for slander." He tried to grab me by the breasts, but I grabbed his hand. At that moment there was no fear in me, there was no respect for dignity. In front of me was just a vile, creeping man who stole my life. I pushed him so hard that he staggered and almost fell, getting tangled in the hem of his robe. "Don't touch me," I said quietly, looking straight into his eyes, running with fear. "God is your judge, Nikolai. But today you will not escape human judgment. The crowd has already seen everything. The crowd has already understood." The reputation that he had been building for decades, brick by brick, collapsed in 3 minutes, burying him under its rubble. Several strong men from among the parishioners, who 5 minutes ago were ready to kiss his hands, now stepped forward, blocking his path to the exit. In their eyes I saw not humility, but an evil peasant Deserito sorted out fairly. But the worst thing was not this. The most terrible thing happened in the center of the hall, where my children remained standing. I looked at them and regretted that I had eyes. Dennis stood pale as a sheet, clutching the phone in his hand, and looked first at the screen, then at his mother, then at the priest, who was now embarrassed by the parishioners. In his gaze, the world was collapsing. Everything he believed in, everything he was proud of, his status, pious family, respect, turned into a dirty puddle. Sveta sat on the bench, covering her ears with her hands and swaying from side to side. Tears black from mascara flowed down her face, and her lips silently moved, repeating the same word, "No." Larissa tried to approach them, extended her hands, shouted something, but Dennis recoiled from her, like a leper. The gesture, complete disgust and pain, told me more than any words. The Lavrov family no longer existed. I stood in the middle of a raging temple, in the center of a scandal that I myself had created, and felt a strange, chilling emptiness. I won. I proved the truth. I destroyed my enemies. But why was it so cold inside? It was as if I myself had died along with their lies. Someone from the church council was already running to call the dean, someone was calling the police to prevent a mass fight. Father Nikolai, having lost the remnants of his dignity, tried to justify himself to the people around him. But his voice was drowned in the general roar of indignation. And I slowly, without looking back, went to the exit. People made way for me, as if before someone with the plague, following with glances in which fear, pity and respect were mixed. I did not yet know that the most difficult test, the test of forgiveness and acceptance, was waiting for me ahead, when the dust from this explosion settled down. After that Sunday in the temple, my life turned into an unrealistic movie. I was both the main character and an outsider. An observer looking at what was happening through cloudy, cracked glass. The scandal that I launched with the press of one button spread through our small city faster than a forest fire in dry weather, leaving no stone unturned from the reputation of the Holy Family. My phone was bursting with calls, acquaintances, business partners, journalists from local newspapers, eager for fried details, called. But I just turned off the device and threw it in the desk drawer. I don't care that I needed neither words of support nor malicious laughs behind my back. Inside me, in the place of former rage, there now lay a scorched emptiness, in which only a cold draught of loneliness walked. Events rolled with frightening speed, like a snowball launched from a steep mountain, sweeping away destinies and careers in its path. The diocesan administration reacted with lightning speed. No one needs such stains on the uniform of the church, especially when there are irrefutable video evidence circulating on all phones in the city. Just 2 days later, a commission arrived at the church, endless proceedings, interrogations, and checks of financial activities began, which revealed not only the moral decline of the rector, but also completely earthly frauds with donations. Father Nikolai was removed from service that same evening, forbidding him from even appearing on the territory of the parish, and soon an official decree came about deprivation of the priest. A man who for years had reveled in his power and inviolability, who was accustomed to looking down on parishioners, suddenly found himself thrown to the sidelines of life, deprived of status, respect and income. In the city they stopped greeting him, former friends crossed to the other side of the street, seeing his sad figure. Sellers in stores turned away, pretending to be busy with the goods. This was worse for him than any prison. For a man whose ego was inflated by every veneration, becoming an invisible outcast turned out to be an unbearable torture. In the first days after the exposure, Larissa tried to play the role of a victim of circumstances, hoping that female solidarity and society's habit of pitying the weak would work in her favor. She went to her friends, tried to tell the version that I was a tyrant and a despot who had lost his mind and defamed an honest woman out of jealousy. But the people who saw the footage on the screen in the temple no longer believed in her meekness, nor in her piety. The lie was too obvious and dirty. The doors of the houses where she had previously been received as a dear guest were now closed to her. The telephone was silent, as if she had contracted a dangerous disease. The most terrible blow awaited her not from society and not from me, but from the one for whom she destroyed our family. When Nikolai's father, now just citizen Nikolai, was kicked out of the church house, Larissa packed her things and went to him, confident that now they could live openly and happily. She apparently painted a romantic picture for herself. Two lovers, rejected by a cruel world, find solace in each other's arms. But the reality turned out to be much more prosaic and harsher than in women's novels. Nikolai, having lost everything because of his cowardice, brought down his anger on the only person who was nearby. Tamara Ivanovna told me about this, who, as it turned out, had her eyes and ears everywhere. She said that Nikolai not only did not let Larissa onto the threshold of his rented apartment, but created a scandal right on the staircase. He shouted that it was she who seduced him, that she was a witch who had ruined his soul and career, that if not for her long tongue and carelessness, he would still be a respected person. He, like a cowardly jackal driven into a corner, renounced her, their long-term relationship and even their children, calling them your offspring, which I now hate to feed. For Larissa, this became the end of the world. She suddenly realized the terrible, merciless truth. And what about the children? Dennis and Sveta found themselves at the epicenter of this explosion without any protection. Their picture of the world was collapsing with the roar of falling skyscrapers. Hourly. I knew that they were also trying to seek contact with the biological father. After all, blood is not water. And in their heads there probably lived the hope that the real dad would be better than the one who exposed them. But Nikolai, faithful to his new tactics of saving his own skin, pushed them away too. When Dennis came to him to talk like a man, he did not even open the door, shouting through the peephole so that they did not dare hang their problems on him, because he already had life is broken. For Dennis, who was always looking for male authority, this was a blow to the gut, knocking out the last remnants of illusions from him. He saw in front of him not a persecuted righteous man and an unloving father, but a pathetic old man, shaking for his own skin, for whom his own children were only an annoying burden. I was left in my huge empty house alone, except for Tamara Ivanovna, who continued to come and silently do her work. The divorce went quickly and quietly, although I expected the worst. Larissa, crushed by the betrayal of her lover and the targeted gaze of the entire city, did not have the strength to fight. She signed all the papers without looking, agreeing to compensation, which would be enough to buy a small apartment on the outskirts, and disappeared from the radar. I heard that she went to some distant aunt in another region, unable to withstand the shame and condemning glances. I was not sorry, pity burned out in me even when I watched that video in the garden. I didn't feel any gloating, only the dull, heavy fatigue of a person who buried a loved one. One evening, when the first autumn snow was already swirling outside the window, I was sitting in the kitchen and looking at the cooling tea. Tamara Ivanovna was fiddling around the stove, and her presence was the only living warmth in this icy kingdom. You're wrong, Alexei Sergeyevich, that they've given up on themselves, she suddenly said without turning around. The house is empty not because there are no people in it, but because you closed the doors. Who should I wait for, Tamara? I smiled bitterly. Other people's children, or look for a new wife in old age? Blood is not everything, she answered quietly, and the same firmness sounded in her voice as on the day of our first conversation. You raised them, you loved them. You were with them when their stomachs hurt and when they got bad marks. And that one, he simply gave genetic material. Family is not paternity by blood. Father is the one who taught him to walk and who lent his shoulder. I wanted to object, to say that the lie poisoned everything, that my mother's betrayal crossed out my efforts, but the words stuck in my throat. I remembered how I taught little Dennis to hold a hammer, how he hit his finger and cried, burying himself in my shoulder, not his mother. I remembered how Sveta, when the first guy left her, she cried all night in my office while I stroked her head and gave her tea. Can this be cancelled by a piece of paper with DNA results? Were the feelings I felt then fake? No. The feelings were real. Only the foundation on which we built was false. But the very building of our affection, perhaps, could still stand if not for my pride. At that moment, for the first time, I thought, did I do the right thing by pushing them away with my mother? I punished Larissa, I destroyed Nikolai, but at the same time I punished those who were guilty only of being born from the wrong person. The doorbell rang. The bell sounded sharply and unexpectedly, breaking the silence of the house like a shot. I shuddered and looked at my watch. It was already late, almost 10 in the evening. I wasn't expecting guests, couriers don't come to this area so late. Tamara Ivanovna looked questioningly at me, wiping his hands on his apron, but I stopped her with a gesture. I'll open it myself. On the threshold, in the light of a street lamp, in which rare snowflakes were swirling, stood Dennis. He looked 10 years older, a haggard face, dark circles under his eyes, stubble that he had never worn before. He stood sadly, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and looked not at me, but somewhere on the floor, at my family slippers. Can I come in? He asked hoarsely, and in this voice there was neither the former self-confidence nor filial demands. It was the voice of a man who has nowhere else to go. I stepped aside, letting him inside, and this simple gesture was more difficult for me than unloading a truck with cement. Dennis entered the hallway. He did not take off his shoes, walked straight into the kitchen in dirty shoes, leaving wet ones on the perfect parquet floor. Traces. But I, a person who always chased my family to be neat, didn't even look at the floor. Now something much more important was being decided than the safety of the laminate flooring. Now it was being decided whether I would remain alone in this huge house for the rest of my days or whether it would make sense again. Dennis sat down at the table in the place where Larissa usually sat, and put a bunch of keys in front of him. I recognized them. These were the keys to the apartment that my wife and I had given as a gift him after graduation. I moved out, he said dully, without raising his eyes. I left furniture, equipment, clothes there. I don't want anything that was bought with your money. That is, with the money you gave. He paused, his Adam's apple twitched, holding back a spasm. I silently put in front of him a cup of tea, which Tamara Ivanovna poured. She, a wise woman, quietly disappeared into her room, realizing that this conversation does not tolerate extra ears. I was with him, Dennis suddenly blurted out, and an angry, offended note appeared in his voice, just like in childhood, when he was unjustly punished. I thought we'd talk like men. I thought he would at least say something, explain. But he didn't even open the door. He shouted through the peephole that my mother and I had ruined his life, that we were the mistakes of his youth. Mistakes, do you understand? I am not a son for him, I am compromising evidence. I listened to him and felt a strange, painful work happening inside me. Just yesterday I was sure that I would never see them, neither a living wife, nor a vile priest, nor these children who carry someone else's blood. But now, looking at the hunched, crushed guy, who was 30 years old, but who looked like a lost teenager, I suddenly saw not the biological material of a rival, but that very same the boy whom he taught to swim on the river. The same Dennis who called me on the flight and asked, "When will Dad arrive?" Did that boy lie to me? No. He loved me sincerely. Because he had no other father. Why did you come, Dennis? I asked quietly. No money, or have nowhere to live? He shook his head, and I saw tears in his eyes, angry, masculine tears that burn his eyes. Fuck you with your money, he shouted, hitting the table with his fist. I came to say that I don't care about tests. I don't care about genetics. I don't care about who slept with whom 30 years ago. Father is not the one who brought it in and forgot. Father is the one who was nearby. He fell silent, breathing heavily, as if he had run a marathon. I remember how you picked me up from the cops when we broke a window, he continued more quietly, looking to the side. My mother then threw a hysteria, screaming that I was disgracing my family. And you silently paid the fine, took me out onto the porch, hit me on the back of the head and said, "A man is responsible for his own mistakes." You didn't rat me out then, you didn't humiliate me, you taught me. And he taught us to smile and light candles. There was silence in the room. But it was no longer the same dead silence that had reigned here in recent weeks. It was the silence in which the truth was born, bitter, but living. I can't make you consider me a son, Dennis said, getting up. I understand, you're disgusted. You look at me and see him. But I want you to know, for me, you are the only dad. And I don't need another. Even if you kick me out now. He turned around and walked towards the exit, slouching, expecting a blow in the back. And at that moment I realized, if I keep silent now, if I let him leave, then I will commit a crime worse than what Larissa and Nikolai committed. They betrayed me out of cowardice and lust, and I will betray a man out of pride. Stop, I called out to him. Dennis froze in the doorway, without turning around. Take off your shoes, I grumbled in my usual master's tone. I've been following like an elephant. Go wash your hands. Tamara Ivanovna warmed up the cutlets. I saw how his shoulders trembled. He turned slowly, and on his face there was such a mixture of disbelief and gratitude that my own eyes stung. We didn't rush into each other's arms, there were no scenes from Mexican TV series. We are just men, we don't know how to do that. But we sat down at the table, and for the first time in many years we talked for real, without masks, without the desire to live up to status. And an hour later Sveta arrived. She didn't enter like her brother. She flew into the house like a whirlwind, tearful, with smeared mascara, and when she saw me, she just fell on my chest. She didn't speak no loud words about choice and male responsibility. She just sobbed, buried in my shoulder, and repeated, "Daddy, Daddy, how can it be?" And I stroked her trembling back, inhaling the familiar smell of her perfume, and finally understood, blood is water. Real kinship is created not in bed, but in sleepless nights by the crib, in common holidays, in illnesses experienced together, in thousands of little things from which life is woven. They were my children, mine. Because I put my soul, mine into them, time, my life. And no Nikolai, no DNA test could take away this right from me, the right to be a father, which I earned through 30 years of work and care. That evening, the four of us sat in the kitchen, me, Denis, Sveta and Tamara Ivanovna, and drank tea. We did not discuss Larissa, we did not remember Nikolai, we talked about the future. Denis said that he wanted to leave the warm place in the office where his mother had given him a job. Connections, and go to work for my company, but not as a boss, but as a simple logistician, to understand how it works. Sveta, who had always been influenced by her mother and dreamed of a social life, suddenly said that she wanted to go as a volunteer to a hospital, because she was ashamed of the identity in which she lived. I looked at them and saw how a collapsed lie, having buried the ideal picture, freed real people. The pain of betrayal is nowhere to be found. Gone, it sat like a sharp thorn in me, and I knew that it would whine about the weather for many more years. But next to this pain, something new appeared, a feeling of dignity and real, hard-won intimacy. We remained a family, not a pious family from the pages of a booklet, but a wounded, crippled, but a real flock that decided to stick together, despite the storm. But there was one more person with whom I needed to meet in order to put the finishing touches, the man from which it all began. A week later, I went to the diocese not to complain or demand. I just wanted to pick up the documents about the debunking in order to formally close this chapter before God, since I had closed it before people. At the exit from the administration building I saw Nikolai. He was sitting on a bench in the park in a civilian coat that hung like a bag on him. Without a cassock, without a golden cross, without a beard, which he shaved off, trying to change his appearance. He looked like a pitiful, flabby old man. He fed the pigeons, throwing crumbs of stale bread and rolls. And there was so much loneliness in this gesture that I felt creepy. He raised his eyes and saw me. I expected anger, curses, screams, but he looked at me with the empty, extinct look of a man who has already lost everything. "Are you satisfied, Alexei?" He asked hoarsely, without getting up. "You got your truth. You destroyed me. Are you satisfied?" I stopped opposite, looking down at him. Previously, I looked up at him, like a spiritual mentor. Now sitting in front of me was just a weak man, crushed by his own sins. "No, Nikolai," I answered calmly, "I'm not happy. I'm just alive." "And you?" "No, they are mine," he suddenly said with some kind of childish resentment. "Children. They are mine, swear, you stole them from me." "I didn't steal," I shook my head. "You threw them away yourself. You traded them for comfort, for a career, for fear. For 30 years you refused them every day when you came to my house and played the role of a guest. And now it's too late to lay claim to a crop that you didn't grow." I turned around and walked to the car, feeling like with every step an invisible weight was falling from my shoulders. I left him there, on the bench, in his personal solitude and oblivion. And a house was waiting for me. A house where the light would be on in the evening, where Denis and Sveta would argue, where Tamara Ivanovna would grumble over unwashed dishes. There was only one thing left, the most important thing. For which, perhaps, it was worth going through this hell, to understand how to live further with this new knowledge, and what to say to those who, perhaps, right now are standing at the same crossroads, not daring to open the terrible door truth. 6 months have passed since the day my familiar world collapsed. This year's winter turned out to be surprisingly snowy, as if nature decided to cover with a white blanket all those scars that remained on the earth and in our souls. Time, of course, does not heal, as they say in books. It does not erase memory and does not return youth. But it is excellent at dulling sharp edges, turning open wounds into rough but reliable scars, with which it is quite possible to continue to live. The house has changed, although the walls remain the same. Dennis and Sveta, I started a small renovation, deciding to get rid of everything that resembled the era of Larissa and her desire for ostentatious luxury. We took out the heavy velvet curtains, which always seemed like forest windbreaks to me, removed the pretentious paintings in gilded frames and repainted the living room in light, calm colors. But the main change did not happen in the interior, but in the very atmosphere of this place. The fear of inadequacy disappeared from the house, the tension disappeared when you are afraid to put your elbow on the table or say something wrong. Now here you could laugh loudly, walk around in stretched sweaters and snore until the morning, without fear that it would ruin your karma or upset your mother. Dennis actually quit the office and came to my base, starting with the simplest position of a dispatcher, to understand how the gears of the business are spinning. I saw how difficult it was for him, how his habit of an easy life was breaking, but he gritted his teeth and did not complain. And for the first time in many years I began to feel for him not just blind parental love, but real male respect. Sveta also found herself. She did not volunteer as she wanted in a fit of grief, but got a job as an administrator in a small veterinary clinic. This work, where you need a lot of sympathy and patience, unexpectedly made her more mature and calmer. We almost didn't talk about Larissa, as if we had entered into an unspoken pact not to stir up the past. I knew through mutual friends that she lived in the neighboring region, worked either as a salesman or as a cashier. And, it seems, she began to go to some other church, trying to atone for her sins or, rather, find new solace. I didn't wish her harm, but I didn't have any desire to see her or hear her voice. Once she became for me like a read book with torn-out pages, there was no point in returning to it. Tamara Ivanovna remained with us, but now she was no longer a silent shadow, sliding around the corners with a rag. We often drank tea together in the evenings, and I learned more about her in these 6 months than in the previous 20 years, about her grandchildren, about her favorite books, about the fact that she knits beautifully. She became the keeper of our new, honest hearth, the very moral compass that prevented us from being false. That evening on the eve of Christmas, we gathered in the living room to decorate the Christmas tree. For the first time in many years, we did it ourselves, without invited designers, who used to create stylish compositions for Instagram. We took out old boxes with toys, many of which I remembered from Dennis's childhood, and fooled around like little ones, hanging glass balls and getting tangled in garlands. At some point, I went to the fireplace and picked up an old family album, heavy, leather-bound, full of professional, retouched photographs. From glossy pages, perfectly combed, smiling people looked at me, successful businessman Alexei, pious wife Larissa, exemplary children. It was a beautiful, expensive success story in which there was not a word of truth, only a glossy lie that we so diligently sold to others and ourselves. I called the children. Look, I said, opening the spread, where we stand against the backdrop of the temple, and next to us, with his hand on my shoulder, is Father Nikolai. Beautiful, isn't it? Dennis winced as if from a toothache, and Sveta lowered her eyes. Dad, why did you get this? Let's throw it in the trash. No, I shook my head, feeling amazing clarity in my thoughts. Now come here, I commanded, taking out my phone. Let's take normal photos, without Photoshop, without posing, just as we are. We gathered in a heap against the backdrop of a decorated Christmas tree, Dennis in a ridiculous sweater with deer, Sveta with disheveled hair, Tamara Ivanovna trying to hide behind my shoulder, and me, tired, with wrinkles that I no longer wanted to hide. I extended his hand, trying to catch everyone in the frame. The hand trembled, someone blinked, someone laughed at the most inopportune moment. The picture turned out to be fuzzy, a little blurry and completely unsuitable for a magazine cover. But when I looked at the screen, I saw more life and light on it than in all those professional photo shoots combined. There were living people there, my family, my real, hard-won, imperfecta family that went through fire and water to find each other again. I looked at this photo and realized that for the first time in 64 years I was absolutely happy, not because everything was fine with me, but because everything was fair with me. I was no longer a wallet, I was not a screen, I was not furniture. I was a father who was chosen not by the right of blood, but by the right of love and deeds. And this title was worth it to survive the collapse of the whole world. I lived a long time life, made a bunch of mistakes and realized one simple thing too late: never run from the truth, no matter how terrible it may seem. Lies are a loan that we take out in life at extortionate interest rates, and sooner or later collectors will knock on the door to take everything. Live so that you don't need to hide your phone, erase messages, and be afraid of your own look in the mirror. And now, get up and walk, right now, comatose your loved ones, look them in the eyes and ask yourself, is everything between us for real? And finally, I want to ask you one question that has been haunting me all these months, and the answer to which I found at too high a cost for myself. What do you think, friends? Does a person have the right to lie for the sake of salvation if it preserves the family and the peace of children? Or is any truth, even the most murderous, better than life in a sweet illusion? Write what you think, it's really important for me to know. And I'll go, our tea is getting cold. Take care of yourself.